I just want to welcome everybody. Welcome to our January meeting of the New River Valley chapter of the Virginia Master Naturalists. We are so excited to have a new training class started. And if you're in the new training class and this is your first chapter meeting, welcome. We're very happy to have you. And also, if you're not a member of our group and you're joining anyway, welcome. We're happy to have everybody here. We've got a lot on our schedule tonight, and I think I'm going to go ahead and give it to Barb to open up our meeting. Barb?
Okay, and I'm going to pass it to Jean Elliott. She's, again, when we've met with our committee last summer, we had hoped to bring in more of the creative arts to a few chapter meetings, which we've done. And Jean was the one who brought Dwight to us. Thank you. So she's going to introduce him for us.
Pleasure. Thank you. Well, Dr. Bigler he's directed the choirs at Virginia Tech since 2009 and is also the artistic director of the Blacksburg Master Chorale. He's conducted concerts and workshops throughout the United States and in China, Austria, the Czech Republic, Italy, and Ecuador. Under his direction, the Virginia Tech chamber singers have performed throughout Ireland and Italy, including singing for Mass at St. Peter's Basilica at the Vatican and St. Mark's Basilica in Venice. His choral compositions are published by Oxford University Press, Henshaw Music, Walton Music, and the National Collegiate Choral Organization. He has received numerous commissions from the Barlow Endowment and from choirs across the nation for new works. His most recent creative endeavor is Mosaic for Earth. While nature itself has served as the core inspiration for this piece, the prose of environmental writers and the work of climate scientists also figured into the creative process. The performance of Mosaic for Earth will feature 300 musicians from Virginia Tech and the New River Valley and make its debut at the Moss Arts Center on April 3rd at 7:30. So take it away. Let's hear about the creative process for this. Thank you so much, Dwight.
Fantastic. Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here and to meet you and to be able to share some of this process with you. Will you give me one last reminder of when I should end? I'll keep an eye on my clock with your agenda for tonight.
Well, if you don't have a lot of questions, 30 or 40 minutes. All right. Does that work for you?
Yep. Yep. That's great. Good. So I'll share my screen. Oh, somebody needs to give me permission to share my screen with you. I'm not sure who has that ability. Is Barb?
Not yet.
Mara, you have to do that if you set up the meeting.
It's
You're
down
muted.
in the middle on the bottom of your screen. I think it says share screen, and there should be a little arrow there with settings, and you can allow other people to share the screen.
Mary, you're muted.
You're muted, Mara.
There we go.
Oh, except that's Mara. Is it Mara or Mara? You're sharing your screen. You actually have to give me permission to share screen. And you're on mute, so we can't hear you if you're asking us questions. Mara.
Okay. Okay, you guys, I'm trying here. Am I sharing my screen right now? Is that what's happening?
Yes.
Okay, how do I unshare it?
Go up to the top to the green section and go to view options and exit screen sharing.
Oh boy. Pause share. Okay. Where's stop share? Red stop share. Okay. Boy, that was fun. All right. So
I think now if you go to the bottom, there's a screen share. It might give you an option to allow somebody else to share their screen at the bottom where it's share screen.
It's green.
I believe you may actually want to be looking for a button that says security. Do you see one that says security?
Yeah. Okay. allow participants to share screen. So I've got that checked. Dwight, you want to see if you can share now?
Ah,
Is it
now,
not letting you?
yes, it is.
Okay. Phew.
Look at that.
I'll get this one day.
Yay.
Is that working? You can see my screen now?
Yes.
Yes, yay.
Ah, very good. Okay, good. Thank you so much. So we'll dive right in. So as Jean mentioned, I'm the director of choral activities at Virginia Tech. A lot of my creative work has to do with composing. And as we have looked, as we're looking and facing at some pretty serious impacts of climate change, human-caused climate change, huge majority of scientists agree on the evidence that shows that human beings are having a significant impact, not for good, on the planet and on our environment. As I've been at Virginia Tech, I've learned more about a lot of the issues relating to this unique geographic area, and have become more concerned in general excuse me, about the issues of climate change and the impact and what we can do to make a difference. So as I've looked at these things, I've particularly been impacted by the evidence of mass extinctions already going on and the ones that will continue happening if climate change continues to get worse and the planet continues to warm, let alone the migration of communities and people and human beings and wildlife throughout the planet as weather keeps changing and farming becomes impossible in some locations and whatnot. There are just so many different impacts that we're gonna have to work through as communities and people, individuals, families, societies. But human impact on the environment it's just very clear and important that we figure out how to deal with this. So in my mind, I thought, well, how can I bring something to the table in this? How can I help possibly? And one of the problems that I see with the efforts to make changes, to live more sustainably and to improve how we interact with the environment is one of the problems is this disconnect between the general public and science. It's difficult to help the general public understand scientific facts. I just know from personal experience, I don't get very many opportunities to interact with scientists, let alone have conversations where they can communicate effectively the details and whatnot in their areas of expertise. And then the second big problem that I see in this issue is figuring out how to motivate large groups of people and individuals to actually make changes to our behavior, our policies, our government, societal, community structures to enact the change that's needed to have an impact and to address the problems. So my goal with this piece is to combine the arts and sciences to address some of these problems, to help hopefully more effectively communicate science in a way that people can understand, or create activities and gatherings where we can increase understanding of different parts of this. And connected to the Mosaic for Earth concert, we'll have some community outreach events where we have panel discussions with experts in various areas, from plastic production and recycling to community recycling and transportation and construction. Dr. Annie Pierce in the School of Construction will be organizing a number of those. We'll end after the concert with another outreach event that will be aimed at helping people make a personal sustainability plan so that it gets down into real actions that people can do to make a difference, as well as having the other events to talk about the bigger things that are also necessary to make a difference. With music, I think one of the biggest things it can bring to the discussion is its ability to connect to motivation, to emotions. As we know, I think all of us probably have experienced this on some level or another. Music can really be a motivational factor in our life. If you go to a Virginia Tech football game, what's the motivation to get the entire 65,000 people jumping up and down together in unison? You play a song for them on the loudspeakers, and they're dancing and screaming and shouting in the stands. You go to a church, And the thing that can bring everybody together is a song that they sing together. We go to a funeral and there's also music involved. We go to celebrations and dances. Music just permeates our experience as human beings and can really motivate us and increase our understanding. So my goal is to weave together music and the visual arts and science and literature and visual arts into a concert experience related with satellite events to hopefully help in all of these areas and motivate our community to make some changes, individuals in our community to make some changes. So text is the foundation of vocal music. So this piece has to be all about the text on the foundational level. That's the message that's being communicated and the springboard for a lot of our discussions. So where did I find the texts for this piece? Lots of discussions with friends, and a few specific friends here at Virginia Tech have been instrumental in helping me find some really wonderful, motivational, powerful, inspirational, and sometimes horrifying texts that I've been able to draw from to make this piece. Here are some of the books. Mary Denson Moore teaches in the Department of English here at Virginia Tech. She teaches a class on environmental literature, and a couple of these books she teaches in that class. Lost Mountain by Eric Ries and The Hour of Land by Terry Tempest Williams in particular. And as I read these, I selected texts that I thought had both the substance, the content that I was looking for, and a beautiful language that almost reflected a poetic language. Most songs sing to poems because there are rhymes, there's structure, there's meter to that, and that pairs well with music. I wanted to get a little more in depth, so I'm using prose, which adds some challenges to the musical side of things because it doesn't always have that kind of meter and structure, but the meat and the content and the substance is in these texts that I definitely want to use in the performance. So one of the other big inspirations for the piece is Psalm 104 from the Old Testament. I found these pieces of art by Barbara Wolf that took verses from Psalm 104 and illustrated them in the traditional medieval style of illuminations, where she has the Hebrew text in beautiful calligraphy with gold leaf lettering over the top, and then illustrates each of the verses, the theme of each of them, in these just stunning illuminations. These are currently in the J.P. Morgan Library in New York City. I went up there and spent some time in their research room to take a look at them in person, and they are absolutely stunning. If you ever get a chance to go look at the actual pieces, I would highly recommend it. These pieces gave me the vision, I guess, of how I can structure the piece. With a musical piece that's an hour long, it needs some sort of dramatic flow to it to keep the audience interested. And so these verses from Psalm 104, I adapted and modernized. I'll share a little bit about that process with you here in a bit. But they are the celebratory pillars of the piece. I don't want the concert evening to be a complete downer, totally depressing, which when you get into the details of climate change and our impact, it can be pretty depressing. Like, there are serious issues. But I'm hoping with this piece, in order to motivate the audience, to juxtapose a recognition of the wonders and inspiration of nature with a stark look at the impact. So the drama of this piece goes back and forth between these celebratory movements and then the more serious texts with modern authors about the problems that we're facing and some solutions, some ideas about how we can address it. So here's one of the pictures of Barbara Wolf. Here are a couple of more that shows you the variety that is in her work. There are 10 of these images that she's used. And Virginia Tech faculty David Franischitz is incorporating these images into his own pictures and video as part of visual projections that will be on large screens around the choir and orchestra on the night of the concert. He's doing a fantastic job. I've seen some previews, and it's going to be a really magical, wonderful experience. To inspire my work in this process, I started in 2019 in the summer as kind of the beginning of my sabbatical, my research leave, with a trip through Switzerland, hiking through nature. We were over there with the Virginia Tech Chamber Singers and Blacksburg Master Chorale on a tour through Spain. I sent them home, and I went to the Alps to hike through nature a little bit. And talk about inspiring. I took a lot of pictures to kind of keep with me those feelings and that fresh air and the vistas and the beauty of that region. Came back to the United States, recovered from jet lag a little bit, packed up my car, and then drove across the United States, visiting national parks along the way and various other places of importance or impact environmentally and socially. I made it all the way to the coast, saw the redwood forests along the coastline, the John Muir Woods down by San Francisco, and then Monument Valley on the way back. And then I drove through the deep south, Alabama, Mississippi, Georgia, and did a civil rights tour, essentially learning things that I never knew about the history of civil rights in the United States. And that it's in and of itself also had some very interesting illuminations into my understanding of environmental issues in this country and how it affects communities and farmers and racial issues as well, and the impact of that in the South. When I was up north, I stopped by the Roosevelt National Park here in North Dakota. Stunning vistas, just beautiful light. It was in mid-June, so everything was green. The animals were out. I saw wild mustangs, prairie dogs, antelope, elk, lots of wonderful wildlife up there. You cross the street, literally, and you find these all surrounding the park. Natural gas drills, oil drills, with all of this happening up there. In fact, there are lots of reports that the roads are quite dangerous to drive on because these trucks just come flying down the roads to get these resources out that we're just sucking out of the earth. And lots of noises, and we'll talk about some of these later and how this impacted the music composition of my piece. So this goes back to, we're going to move back to the text now and looking at how I adapted Psalm 104. I wanted to share a little bit about this. Psalm 104, of course, is an ancient text, been around for thousands of years. And I wanted to kind of modernize it to make room in this piece for people from all backgrounds or religions or no religions. And so I took the essence, what I felt like is the essence of these Psalms, and I reworded them and adapted them for this piece in particular. So you can see here in verse 1 on the left-hand side here in the black squares, this is the King James version of Psalm 104. And then on the right-hand side is my adaptation of it. So this first verse, bless the Lord, O my soul, O Lord my God, thou art very great, thou art clothed with honor and majesty. I adapted that to just give it a little bit more room. In my version of it, there's still room for people from many different religious backgrounds, as well as people from no religious backgrounds. So verse 1 in my version, bless this world, O my soul. The stars and galaxies are clothed with honor and majesty. I grew up in a family where one of our religious practices was praying over our food or people who were sick or things in our life that needed help, and we were hoping for and praying for help. And so this verse 1 in my piece kind of captures that language. Bless this world. We are acknowledging that this world needs help, and it continues from there. Verse 2, I moved a little bit away. There are a lot of metaphors in these old texts, and I wanted to reflect a little bit more of the science of what happens in these. So take a look at verse 3. It's talking about how important water is, and in verse 3, I wanted to make that even more clear, and then paint a little picture of the evaporation process and how water moves into clouds and then transfers and rains somewhere else. So my verse 3 says, your water is the beam of life. Life on earth wouldn't exist without water. Your clouds, like chariots, move water from earth to sky, and wings of wind carry them to distant regions. And then this last verse, the image in the Psalms is about these angels and flaming fire. And as I looked at Barbara Wolf's image, and a number of her images actually, the concept of the atomic energy and the energy of fire and that constant motion came to mind. And so my line for that portion of the psalm is, much of your work is unseen, but always moving, the perpetual motion of flaming fire. And I went through all of the different psalm verses that I selected in the various themes and did this kind of adaptation. And I was so excited to see that when the Virginia Tech Chamber Singers rehearsed the piece a couple of years ago, before the pandemic happened and the original premiere date was shut down, I had a number of students who were very devout religious students and students who are atheist students. Both of them made comments to me that they felt like they were able to connect with the text and the music in really powerful ways. I was so glad to hear that. I'm hoping that this piece provides a way for people from all backgrounds to engage in this topic. Because as we know, who's going to fix climate change? Human impacted climate change? Humans are. And we live all over the planet and have a million different backgrounds and experiences and religions or not religions and cultures and languages. We all got to do something. So I'm hoping to create a piece of work that can engage more people. These pictures are the nightmare pictures that show the process of working through all of these texts, stacks and stacks of texts and ideas, lots of cutting and pasting. I didn't eat on my dining room table, I think, for a number of months as I worked all of this out. But you can see eventually it starts to get some order in the bottom right-hand corner where I had organized texts by these different themes and tried to work out what could actually work in a musical setting. When I was on the road, I continued all this work. I set up a little screen tent and worked in there. And I stopped at the Georgia O'Keeffe Ranch in New Mexico and spent a few nights there hiking and also working. They let me use their conference room for a little bit to set up my little keyboard. And then at my home, this is my composition desk, my keyboard. I built a big stand for my 11 by 17 pages and went to work. So in the composition process itself, I wanted to share a little bit about this. One of the main focuses and goals for me as a composer in this particular piece, I decided to do a little something different than what I had done before in my typical mode of composing. I used to kind of come up with a melody a lot of times, and then a melody that I liked and it worked with the text, and then I'd figure out what to do around it. This time I flipped that on its head and decided I need, for this piece, to start by creating the atmosphere. And it really reflects our life on Earth. We need water to live, and we need air. So I wanted to create the atmosphere for all of these texts to live in. So what does that mean? Creating a musical atmosphere. That has to do with what's playing in the orchestra. It has to do with the accompaniment, not necessarily the melody. It has to do with the rhythmic style, the articulation. It has to do with the melodic contour. How high does it go? How low does it go? Is the speed of the melody? What kind of melody is it? Is it a harsh melody? Is it a harsh harmony? Is it a very friendly harmony that really sounds beautiful to us, or does it need to have dissonance in it? So I thought about all of these different components and how to create the atmosphere of the piece and the world that the text and the melody that could then live in. As we break this down a little bit more, these are some of the specifics that relate to each of these areas. In the orchestra, we have our strings, winds, brass, and percussion. Rhythmic styles, we can have really fast pieces, fast music, legato or smooth rhythms. Slow, they tend to be slower rhythms. Complex rhythms, you can layer up all of these things in an orchestra and the choir, so you have lots of different rhythms happening at the same time that can evoke certain emotions in the listeners. That has to do with the complexity as well. And because I want this piece to be accessible and be able to have lots of people listen to it and connect to it, I try to incorporate some folk elements, which means dance rhythms and dance folk style melodies in some of the movements. Harmonic language, you can take this to your next music theory class and explore what these mean. Modal scales, diatonic scales. Am I going to use something like that we have? Do, re, mi, right? That kind of thing. Or are we going to have minor scales? Or are we going to have these kind of harmonies? All of these kind of things automatically make you tense up or calm or get energetic. Blues style music, intense style music, or calming themes. Melodic contour, here's a little bit of some of the descriptions of that. Angular melodies, lots of skips and jumps, or folk style melodies. Tessitura has to do with the height of the pitch or the low portion of the pitch. Human beings exist to react to different pitches in different ways. A baby cries at a really high pitch because they want our attention. And that's just how our brain works. To get attention, you have something really high. So I worked that into these concepts as well. And then I got to work. Here's a picture of the orchestra score. Had to figure out what instruments to play what parts. And then I had to take all of those instrument parts and smush them together into the piano part that Joetta gets to play for the choir rehearsals. She probably would not, we couldn't pay her enough to have to play the piano part from this gigantic score that has the oboe and the flute and the violin and all of these parts. You could probably do it, Joetta, but I know from my personal experience, I don't like it very much. So here's the piano reduction. This is the music that the choir looks at. And I want to share a little bit of this actual music with you as well. So I've created some preview recordings of the piece that use real choir recordings from back in 2020 when the Virginia Tech Chamber Singers were learning it and the Master Chorale. I recorded the chamber singers in rehearsal before everything shut down. And then over the pandemic, I played in orchestra parts around those real choir recordings to create the orchestra. So we can give you a little bit of a preview. And then I sent these orchestra versions to some of our soloists. Danielle Talamantes is an amazing soprano soloist, a Virginia Tech graduate, and she sings at the Met Opera in New York and sings all over, the wonderful career, lives up in DC. I emailed her these orchestra preview versions, and she sang her solo part over top of it, recorded it at her home in Washington, D.C., and sent that file back to me, and I layered it in with the orchestra. So we'll hear a little bit of the choir, these instruments from my computer, and Danielle for this first movement. And the text, I have the text here for you to review, to see along, to read along as we listen to this. For this first movement, I wanted to capture the sparkly energy of the stars at the beginning, the expanse of the universe. And hopefully you can hear that in the piano part. And then as the singers come in a little bit later, let me know if you can hear this as it starts. Here's Danielle.
The stars and galaxies
That's just a little taste of the first movement, little taste of that. It goes on, has the fire at the very end of it. It gets quite fast and a little bit syncopated, accented, which is kind of fun. The second movement gets into these mountains. Isn't this stunning, this image that Barbara Wolf has created? The energy of the waves on the top of the mountains reflects the text here. You laid the foundations of the earth. They will never be removed. You covered the earth with deep water, which stood above the mountains. Then nature moved, the mountains rose, and the waters fled. Nature's power was on full display. I love how she has the layers in this image that show the fossils and the evolution over time of life on the planet. We have all of these little fossil images inlaid there, as well as here is where the Hebrew calligraphy is here, the text of the actual verse layered in with that, and then we have these beautiful mountains and the ocean on top of it. Think about how the atmosphere for this piece is created and how it relates to the text as we listen to a little bit of this piece here in a second. I wanted to show you, before we actually listen to this movement, some of the nitty gritty of my composition process. I always use these big sheets of composition paper and sit at my piano and improvise a lot of times. I'll think about, come up with the image and the concept that I want. But when it comes down to figuring out notes, I have my own process that includes a lot of times this reduced format and a lot of shortcuts. So I have lots of notes and random scribblings happening here. I work at the piano, so I always have these 2 lines that are just for the piano and then these 2 lines that are for the choir. But I'm always thinking about what the orchestra is going to end up being like and what instruments I want to play which parts. Every instrument has a range limit. They can't play above a certain note and below a certain note. So I always have to be thinking about what each instrument can play, and it influences what I write. Lots of shorthand where I didn't want to write things out, so I would say, repeat this section. And then I would write some ideas about orchestration down here. The orchestra, I want to swoosh, like crashing waves at this part. When the text says, then nature moved. My penmanship is really bad. Somebody's going to have a hard time translating this eventually. As is often the case with anybody writing a book or writing a piece of music, I came up with some ideas that I kind of like the ideas, but it became obvious that they just didn't fit the text, didn't match the words and what I wanted overall. So I keep these sketches in a pile for future use. If anybody saw Bernstein's the new West Side Story movie that came out a few months ago, Steven Spielberg with Bernstein and Sondheim, West Side Story, Bernstein used some material from West Side Story that didn't make the Broadway musical. He ended up putting it on the side. He used it in some of his other stuff. Some of his other really popular choral music actually ended up with some reused parts of that. So this is a good example of recycling, right? So here is the music for the second movement about these mountains rose. I love the idea of rocks being stable but still moving. So you can hear this very consistent kind of energy. Talking about the foundation of the earth never moving has this kind of stable foundation to this little part with some motion on top. Coming up, nature's going to start moving. So what happens to the music? We go to something else. It moves. The water's fled and we have the run here. Into another section where the soloist returns with hopefully a melody that's quite beautiful that I'm trying to bring in the kind of the beauty of nature into that next section. So this next movement I wanted to show a little bit about gets into the modern texts that I selected for this piece. I want to share a little bit of these because these are quite powerful. This first text from the fifth movement is probably the biggest movement. There are 14 movements in the piece. The whole piece is about 75 minutes long altogether. We'll perform it with a little intermission in the middle to give you a little break. Movement 5 there's lots of meat in this with lots of different texts. So this text is by Terry Tempest Williams from The Hour of Land, and I'll just read through this real quick. It begins with the principal kind of theme about this movement. We continue to evolve and transform who we are in relationship to where we are. We do not live in isolation from the physical world around us. Nature beckons our response. And then I moved, and then another part of that text, she tells about this little bit of history and policy, I guess, in Wyoming. In Wyoming, a knock on your ranch house door may be followed by the news that while you own the surface rights to your land, the federal government has the mineral rights, and it just sold them to an oil company. Within days, a road is cut, drilling begins, and the wellheads, compressor stations, and processing plants are constructed, regardless of your sentiments, livelihood, or well-being. So I start with kind of the principal theme, and then I move into illustrations of what's happening and how that theme kind of happens. The text continues. This is all in Movement 5. There's a lot of text in this. This particular poem is by Jim Wayne Miller, a poem called Small Farms Disappearing in Tennessee, a poem that I found in the Appalachian Journal. Sometimes a whole farm family comes awake in a close, dark place over a motor's hum to find their farm's been rolled up like a rug with them inside it. They will be shaken onto the streets of Cincinnati, Dayton, or Detroit. This text is, as you see as we get along, this is where my trip through the Deep South connected really with this text. The Great Migration that happened there in the early 1900s, where black families were, as soon as they got successful, the white populations around them said, and they killed them, chased them out, burned down their towns, that kind of thing. There was lots of movement out of these areas. And they continue as corporations continue buy up small farms and whatnot, families keep transferring. So that's kind of what this text is about. These squares on the left talk about some of my concepts with the piece. The choir sings that first part, and then these next three lines say to me that we kind of live in a circus with some of this stuff. Like, it just is kind of crazy, it seems to me. So those three lines say, it's a ring, a syndicate dismantling farms on dark nights, filing their serial numbers smooth, smuggling them north like stolen cars, disposing of them part by stolen part. Parts of farms turn up in unlikely places. Weathered gray boards from a Tennessee Burley tobacco barn are up against the wall of an Ohio office building, lending a rustic effect. One missing farm was found intact at the head of a falling creek in a recently published short story, so it doesn't exist anywhere except in a poem now. One farm that disappeared without a clue has turned up in the colorful folk expressions of a state university buildings and grounds custodian. Then the last two lines, a whole farm was found in the face of Miss Hattie Johnson, lodged in a Michigan convalescent home. And again, these bits on the left, the little squares, are descriptions of how I set them musically. I decided to have some parts for solo, some kind of capture the style of Aaron Copland in his hoedown kind of style with Americana kind of thing. And then another soprano solo that's in a blues style, the part that's about Miss Hattie Johnson. So there are lots of different ways that I've approached putting these pieces together, which on its own kind of makes the piece a mosaic as well. It's a mosaic of musical textures and structures with texts by different authors, the performing people who sing the different texts. Sometimes it's choir, sometimes it's a soloist. It's a big mix that I hope sticks together in some ways. Then the number 5 ends with kind of with a tenor solo that leads into the moral of the whole piece as well. So the tenor sings. And these texts also, I'll preface it with, these texts are by Eric Rees. So I shift now from Terry Tempest Williams to Jim Wayne Miller to Eric Rees here at the end. He will be attending the concert, by the way, and will be giving a presentation in the English department. He's a faculty over in Kentucky State. Oh my goodness, I just forgot. I'm pretty sure that's where he is. Kentucky State University. He says, a true case of home economics would make sure the place called home maintains its health and stability. We are a species that has evolved to find beauty in the natural world. We love what we find beautiful, and we do not destroy that which we love. Isn't that beautiful? It's just stunning. So the tenor soloist sings that, and then the choir dives in with a stark kind of sudden reminder of what what's happening and some of the problems with they sing the text of a folk song, a folk poem that says, "The bosses ride fine horses." This poem comes from West Virginia with all of the mining history that happened there. "The bosses ride fine horses while we walk in the mud. Their banner is the $sign while ours is striped with blood." And then I bring back that haunting line of Eric Ries: "We love what we find beautiful, and we do not destroy that which we love." With this piece, I also incorporate some of the noises and experience of my travel across the country. Up by the Roosevelt National Park, with all of these drilling fields around it, there was one particular place that a drill had this constant banging, clanging sound. My recording has some of the wind noise as well, but you can hear the drill in the background. I recorded sounds of birds, sounds of drills, different sounds along my way to incorporate some of this. When I got back and was working on this fifth movement, I thought, oh, here is a musical idea that I have to incorporate this drilling sound. So you can see here from the music, this is the drilling sound that starts the piece, and the soprano soloist comes in with the first line of text.
We continue to evolve and transform who we are in relationship to where we do not live in isolation from the physical world around us. Nature because our
Coming up is the circus part, if you remember, talking about that situation in Wyoming. And it continues on from there. So very kind of disjunct sections in this. We'll skip over this a little bit here. This shows some more of my working out of some of these ideas for the circus section. I took notes for where I wrote some of these parts across the country, just for my own sake, kind of my own journal on the music. Number 6. Oh, it's a haunting psalm, I think. The moon waxes and wanes, a pendulum of nature. It gets into the process of night and day and how the animals come out and hunt, and then the mankind wakes up in the day. And the piece begins and ends with the text about how the moon waxes and wanes in this very slow pendulum kind of nighttime, dark kind of sound with the flute solo. Continues on like that. We'll skip over the rest of that. 2 last little bits, then we'll have some time for questions. I hope that's all right. I wanted to share a little bit about this one about the ocean. I kind of like this one. I love the image of this whale and all of the details of the fish all the way through here. I wanted to capture a little bit of a feel of the ocean in ways that we connect with it, interact with it. So this is the great and wide sea where there are innumerable creatures, both great and small. My version of this has a little bit of a feel of a sailor song, where I try to capture the motion of the water. Continues on in that vein. We get into the Leviathan, and it gets a little bit dark for a little while, and then comes back out. So I think we're about out of time. As the piece continues, number 10 has this. I'm not sure where that came from. That little scribble there might have been my cat, actually, sitting right here in front of me on my desk. But this movement is for soprano solo. I want to play just a little bit of the opening of this. I try to capture the waves a little bit in this, with the strings and the harp coming up in a very slow. I'll play the soprano part with my piano. I wanted it to kind of reflect how ocean waves just smoothly come up. And that meeting place between ocean and land is one of the richest parts of life and diversity, right? Where these different environmental systems, ecosystems overlap. It just is magical. And we get a stark contrast here again with number 11 from a text by Terry Tempest Williams. The irony of our existence is this: we are infinitesimal in the grand scheme of evolution, a tiny organism on Earth, and yet, personally, collectively, we are changing the planet through our veracity, the velocity of our reach, our desires, our ambitions, and our appetites. We multiply, our hunger multiplies, and our insatiable craving accelerates. Consumption is a progressive disease. We believe in more possessions, more power, more war, anywhere, everywhere. Our advance of aggression continues. Those are notes by my cat. My aggression toward myself is the first war. So it gets very stark. It's like a slow march towards destruction, a bit ominous as we get to the end of that. I won't play this one for you. We'll skip ahead to the end here. This just gets through more of my process of writing, keeping track of what's done, what's still to go, what I still need to do. And then the very end here, y'all, if you want to know more, come and tell me. I'll share more with you about the orchestration process. This is our last one. When Women Were Birds, this is what it ends with. We end with a bit of hope, where I love this text by Terry Tempest Williams. Once upon a time, when women were birds, there was the simple understanding that to sing at dawn and to sing at dusk was to heal the world through joy. The birds still remember what we have forgotten, that the world is meant to be celebrated. I hope that our concert looks something like this. We'll have big screens with a lot of the pictures, 200 voices singing with full orchestra and 4 soloists up front. Put it on your calendar, April 3rd. The time is actually 7 p.m. We changed it, 7 p.m. You can get tickets through the Moss Arts Center. There we go. There's our musical cadence, so I can feel like we actually finish. We'll record the concert on video and audio. We'll release the recording on all of the major online streaming platforms. And thank you for having me and letting me talk nonstop for this time. I went a little bit fast towards the end, skipped over a little bit of stuff. Sorry, I shortened a little bit of it. But questions from any of you? Questions, comments?
I think there's one in the chat.
Yeah, from Sandy.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, I wasn't keeping track of the chat.
That's all right. We are. You don't need to worry.
Yeah.
Sarah asked if that was Lauterbrunnen at the very beginning in Switzerland. Yes, that was Lauterbrunnen. Yes. Were the Barbara Wolf illuminations designed to stand alone, or were they part of another project? She created them as a standalone piece of art, a collection of 10 different illuminations. If you Google Barbara Wolf with 2 Fs, and just Google Psalm 104 and Barbara Wolf, you can look at all of them and read about her creative process. And she actually has some really fascinating videos of her creative process. She makes a lot of her own paint. Those illuminations are actually painted on vellum, actual animal skin, and she talks about the historic practice of that and the difference between the different kinds of vellum. It's really quite fascinating. She has done a number of pieces that are now in that library as well, in the museum there, part of their rare book collection. Other questions? Oh, lots of thanks. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Any other?
I have
other
a question. Oh,
Yes.
is it my turn?
Yes.
Okay, that last piece of art that you had with from Terry Tempest for if when women were birds, is that also Barbara Wolf?
Yes, all of
Ah,
those
okay,
painted images are part of that collection, Psalm
okay.
104. Yep. There's, I think, I'm trying to remember the ones that I didn't show you. There's the bird one that we showed at the very end. There's the ocean one. There's one with wheat. There's one with grapes. There's one, I think I may have shown most of the rest of them. There's a beautiful one with flowers around, but I think I showed you that one at the very beginning. Uh, it's amazing to me how most art is like this. Most art, if you see it in a book, it can really make an impact on you and it can be fascinating to study. But when you see it in person, it always is a completely new experience. Like I had looked at her pieces online, and they're really good reproductions of the images that she has online. But when I got there in person, it was like a whole different piece of art. And I've had that experience with lots of different kind of famous pieces of art that we see in textbooks and then you see in person. It just comes to life in a whole new way. And I know that this music will as well, because these preview recordings had electronic orchestra and a choir with about 30 voices. We'll have a choir of 200 with the Blacksburg Children's Chorale. Also, there's music that I wrote just for the kids because I want them to be involved in these conversations as well, right? These sustainable living habits are something that we have to teach and we have to live with throughout our lives. So I want them to be involved as well. I hope that other groups will be able to perform it around the world in cities that have community groups and university groups and orchestras, and give us a way to engage in these conversations. Here's another question. Let's see. Has the process of creating this work changed the way you interact with nature in your daily life or think about your role in the climate crisis? Yes, it's still in process. Driving across the country taught me things I didn't know that I needed to know. You know what I mean? It was a new experience. Being able to drive across the country was, if you ever get a chance to do that and you haven't done it, I would highly recommend it. I've flown across the country a number of times and you miss everything that way. Driving it and taking the time to do that. And I purposefully drove, I tried to not drive when it was dark so that I could see everything. So I saw the changes in geography. I saw the weather patterns. I saw the colors. I saw the cities. One of my biggest disappointments, actually, this sounds really trite, but one of the things I noticed in the way that our current economy works, it was impossible to find anything good to eat just off of an interstate. Like every gas station has the same rows of junk food. And that's all the options are, like to find a place that actually has unique food that's unique and wonderful according to that region and the particular cultures that come out. It was impossible. So our current structure of living has impacted us in so many ways that we're losing actually a lot of cultural richness, let alone the natural resources. I was shocked to drive through California, I think close to Bakersfield. There are these huge gas fields, hundreds of drills across the landscape that I'd never heard of. I had no idea were there. And then driving back, I stopped in Tulsa and was having a conversation with a family, a couple that were there on vacation, having a conversation about Tulsa. I actually wasn't planning on stopping in Tulsa, but it was in that random breakfast conversation where I first learned about the Tulsa massacre in the early 1900s. I was never taught about it. I had never heard of it. And those kinds of learning experience happened all the way through. And when I drove across the Mississippi Delta region, I have a whole new understanding, still just a little understanding, but a whole new understanding of the agricultural impact, the style of life, the different environmental things that they faced, as well as the cultural things, and racism, systemic racism, policies, farming, like all of these kinds of things. It was fascinating. So highly recommended if you ever get to do that. Sorry, and I keep talking. Other questions or comments?
Mm.
That if you, I hope that you'll make it to the concert. The tickets will be sold through the Moss Art Center box office. They are not actually on sale yet. we're hoping that this Omicron variant gets over here in a month and we can get back to in-person rehearsals so that we can have the concert. We think that that's what will happen based on what's happened in other places. We're hoping that this surge passes fairly quickly.
We hope so too, Dwight.
Yeah.
It'll be wonderful.
I hope it happens.
Yes,
We're
yes.
determined. We might be singing in masks, but
That's okay.
It'll be recorded for history. It's better than not singing at all. So, thank you for having me. Really good to meet you all, and thanks for letting me share a little bit of myself with you tonight.
Thank you. It's been a really
Thank
wonderful
you.
experience to learn about your creative process and to hear about this piece. And it's just very exciting. So thank you. Thank you for coming.